when I was preparing this message this week from this passage in Mark, the phrase that kept coming back to me was the old cliche or the old phrase, out with the old, in with the new. But if I was to give this sermon a title, it would be more like, very eloquently as always, out with the old, in with the new, brackets, kind of. That would be the title if I was to give it, because I was out with the old, not quite, so it'd be kind of in brackets would be how I would put it. Because what becomes clear as we go through Mark's gospel is that Jesus brings newness. Jesus brings in the new. And sometimes that newness looks like change. Changing what you're doing and changing why you are doing it. So Jesus, when he comes, doesn't he? He says elsewhere, I didn't come to abolish the law. The law is important, and it came from God. But I came to fulfill it. So that's why there's the kind of in there. So he came to fulfill things. He came to change things. And as he meets different people, as he goes through his life, as he goes through his ministry, people are challenged by what he has to say. And people are challenged to change, as we are challenged to change by Jesus today. To conform to the teaching of Jesus, to recognize how his coming changes everything, how his arrival, his birth, his life, changed things, and he brought in the new. And we have to change according to him. The people here, some of the people that he would talk to, many of the Pharisees, even religious leaders, would have to change either the way that they did things from the Bible or their own man-made traditions piled up, of which the Pharisees and others made many. So they would have to, the coming of Jesus informs those things and renews those things and changes those things. They need to change their way of thinking in that sense. It's kind of out with the old and in with the new, as we have to do when we come to Jesus, as we have to do when we follow him daily. And this often shows up in different ways, manifests itself on different subjects and different things. So we read of this question about fasting. So, this question about fasting, and through this, Jesus, yes, speaks about fasting, and we'll look at that in a moment. Also how his arrival and coming departure will inform and change the purpose of that practice. Because Jesus wasn't the first guy in the Bible to fast, but his arrival, his coming, changes how and why it is done. We'll consider that in a moment. But in doing so, he also makes a larger point here. He's making a larger point about the fact that they need to change their mind, allow their theology and their practice and lives to be shaped by Jesus. And is that not what we want this morning? Sometimes we don't, because we don't like the change that comes to us. But ultimately we know, I know that's not what I want. Even if I don't really want it right now, I know that is what I want. For all of our life, all of our practice, all that we do as believers, as churches, to revolve around him, to move around him. For our minds to be conformed to him and to his ways. So let's pray this morning, Lord, if there's any way where I am clinging to my traditions, my man-made stuff, or my way of thinking, or a way of thinking and a worldview that is out of sync with you and your word, you make that clear. Reveal that to me. Show that to me today. Please change that, even though it can be painful. Sanctification is painful at times, but so worth it, because we long and want him and more of him. As we'll see, even with regards to fasting, as we're saying, we want more of you, Lord. So first of all, the people come with a question. They come with a question. Now, sometimes people came to Jesus with a question, but not always with the right motive, if you know what I mean. They had a bit of an agenda, or a bit of a there's something going on there. So some would try and trip him up, give him a curveball question, see if he can handle with it. Looking for an excuse to arrest him. If we can get him to say something heretical, then we can arrest him. There he said it, put him on trial. That's what they end up doing, isn't it? Do we need any more evidence? He said this. But I think here, there's maybe a pretty genuine question. There might be some folk within there who are looking for an argument, but it seems a pretty genuine question based on an observation, based on something that they've noticed about Jesus and his disciples that's kind of different from some of the other people. that they've encountered. So read in verse 18. Says, verse 18 says, now John's disciples, that's John the Baptist, and the Pharisees, were fasting. And people came and said to him, that is Jesus, why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? So John and his disciples were fasting. That's what John was known for that. He had a pretty inexpensive diet as well. I believe it was honey and wild locusts, so he wasn't known for overindulging was our John. But his disciples also fasted, possibly anticipating the coming of the Messiah. The Pharisees fasted. The only I think prescribed time of fasting in the law was in the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16. But the Pharisees had added Mondays and Thursdays. The Pharisees were kind of known for doing it because they liked to be seen to be doing it. Jesus warns against a particular type of attitude in fasting. When you read Matthew 6, they would sort of look all wild and really tired and oh, woe is me, I've been fasting all week, and stand out in public and show people that. And Jesus says, don't do that. Please, whatever you do, don't do that. When you fast like this. Don't fast so that people can look at you and see how holy you are or how holy you think you are. So that was the only prescribed time, though you do see fasting in the Bible, in the Old Testament, at various points, accompanying different experiences and times. So think of Nehemiah. I'm always so moved by Nehemiah in chapter 1 when he hears, as they're returning to Jerusalem, that the city is in ruins and its gates are burned with fire. And he's so burdened that he comes before the Lord in prayer and fasting for these people and thinking, Lord, what can I do? It can be done at a time of repentance. In Joel 2, you read about that. He says, now come repent and fast in sackcloth and ashes for the Lord. Now that I think about it, I think the Ninevites did that, didn't they? When Jonah came preaching, and much to Jonah's annoyance, they actually repented and were fasting and calling out, Lord, maybe he'll listen to us. You also see Daniel doing this in chapter 9 before he has these amazing visions, just as he's seeking the Lord, seeking God and praying to him. Also see in Esther, when the Jews hear that the plan is that they're going to be wiped out, and they come before the Lord and they command a fast and time of prayer and lament also. Even in Jesus' lifetime, when he's taken up to the temple by his parents, we find Anna, don't we? And it says that she's worshipping and praying and fasting before the Lord. So this could be done. There was the prescribed in Leviticus 16, and there was also just the voluntary or responsive types of fasting. Yet what these people see, so these people, probably a lot of them Jewish, are thinking of all these folks in their head, and they're seeing the disciples of John fasting, they're seeing the Pharisees fasting, and then they look at Jesus and his boys, and what are they doing? They're feasting. They're doing the opposite of fasting. In fact, last week Andy, of course, was in the calling of Levi, and he's dining with everyone. He's actually described as dining and feasting, which interestingly is also biblical. If you want to say amen at that point, you're welcome to do so. But okay, that's also biblical. Both feasting and fasting are biblical. And here's Jesus gathering around a dinner table, eating with people. He's partying, effectively. It just didn't look particularly religious. My goodness, he's enjoying himself. What's he doing? How can he be a prophet? This is peculiar when at least the Pharisees doing it, so they're seen, and John the Baptist guy is fasting. But he said, why do you not? And it's a good question. I think it's a good question. I would say, well, that's fair enough, I suppose, if you've seen everyone doing it. So how does Jesus respond? And Jesus responds with what, to me, initially when I read it, is a surprising illustration. I don't think you were going to say that. He says, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. Now, note what Jesus doesn't say. He doesn't say, you don't have to think about fasting anymore. Or don't bother with fasting anymore. Which is why it's out with the old, in with the new, kind of. Because he's not chucking out fasting altogether and saying, don't do it. It's a little different now. Or the way some of you have been doing it isn't for the right reasons or in the right way. Nor does he attack the way that others fast, although he does criticize that elsewhere, like in Matthew 6, as we mentioned there. It might be seen. I'm also realizing, I'm just kind of assuming that, when I'm talking about fasting, I'm talking about going without food or some other worldly comfort for a period of time for a particular reason. I realize I'm talking about it. I'm just kind of assuming people know what that is. But they were doing it so that they might be seen. Rather, he's changing the way that they think about it. New way of thinking, new purpose in fasting, new way of doing this, because the new time has come, because the Savior is here. He helps them see the new purpose. It is about him. It's about Jesus. This image of the bridegroom makes a bit more sense, and there's a lot of things you could say about that. It makes a bit more sense when we think about how the Old Testament writers spoke about a bridegroom. See, in the Old Testament, the bridegroom was the Lord. This was kind of talking about the Lord himself. So when Jesus is saying the bridegroom is with them, he's showing more of who he is. He said, I love it as we go in Mark, he sort of drops this in, and you just kind of go like when we're talking about him claiming to be the Son of Man. That's huge. He's going to be Son of Man from down. And now he's saying, oh, by the way, the bridegroom, that, he referring to himself in that way. Isaiah 62 verse 5 speaks of God, the bridegroom, rejoicing over the bride. And Hosea says, talking about the people of God, I will betroth you to me forever. And this continues throughout the New Testament, doesn't it? Think of the way Paul writes in Ephesians 5. What image does he use to portray marriage? The image of Christ and the church, the bridegroom and the bride. Or all the way through up to Revelation 19 at the end, the marriage supper of the Lamb. We are the bride, he is the bridegroom. And there's many other versions of that where we see Paul, part of the reason he was annoyed at the Corinthians, he says, I betrothed you as a pure virgin to Christ, and you have effectively committed spiritual adultery on him. So Jesus' point is that I am the bridegroom, they are the guests. Why would they be fasting now? Now is the time for joy. Now is the time for feasting, because the bridegroom is here. Fasting portrayed a longing for him. He says the bridegroom's here. Now is the time for joy. Now is the time to party, because the bridegroom is here. And actually, those that are currently fasting are missing the point, or have not yet realized who Jesus is. The point is he's here. And when we're in the presence of the bridegroom, it is the time for joy and the time for feasting. But the time will come for fasting. Well, when is that? Look at the passage with me again. As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. You see, Jesus would be taken. He would be taken from his disciples. Mark's gospel is building up and ramping up to that point where Jesus knew he was going to go, where he was going to go and die. His departure was coming. He would go and give himself on the cross for sinners, for these disciples, and for all who would come and put their faith in him. He would come and die for sins, rise again to new life, and he would ascend and be seated in the heavenly realms. And so there's a sense in which he's taken. His departure has come. Or his departure, has happened, but for them at this point it would come. When the work of salvation was done. But he says, I won't leave you alone. I'll send the Spirit. I'll send another. And the Spirit came at Pentecost, as we know. And so then Jesus says they will fast in that day. That time is to come, but it's not now. Because then they will miss him. Then they will seek his presence through prayer and fasting, which shows this is still for today. Like when Jesus tells them, don't fast like the hypocrites, he's not saying don't fast at all. He's just saying just don't do it like that. That's a terrible way to do it. But he says when you fast, anoint yourself, wash yourself. Don't make it like try and be on show, all fasting and stuff. He says it's about seeking Jesus. And we see examples of this when we go through the New Testament. In Acts, for example, Acts 13, They're a group, including Saul and Barnabas, who are praying and fasting before the Lord. And it's during that time they're worshipping together. The Lord said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." It says, then after fasting and praying, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. In the following chapter, at the end of chapter 14, they appoint elders in every church and committed them to the Lord with prayer and fasting. So there's something they're praying for these guys. They're seeking the Lord for his wisdom and guidance and who to appoint, and also praying for them in the ministry that they would have. So this did seem to continue. I feel it's worth talking about it a bit, partly because the church and denomination that I grew up didn't seem to talk about this a lot. I don't remember hearing loads about this. I actually sometimes think other types of churches and denominations to ourselves are sometimes better at talking about this than we are at times. I think also there's something about Scottish culture. I don't think we are known and world famous for our abstinence from food. I don't think that's... What are those Scottish people known for? Oh, they just never indulge, do they? I don't think that's really... I mean, from where I am standing, I can see a bit of the sign that says the home of the deep-fried Mars bar. That's what we are famous for. That's what we are known for. If we can batter it, we will. And we have battered it before. And so maybe there's just something there that's like that. That's not what we tend to do. Feasting, we're really good at that. Maybe fasting is just something that we are... less good at. And of course, fellowship with God's people rightly includes feasting and enjoying that together. Yet we see God's people in the Bible and around the world, of course, God's church throughout history, doing this individually and corporately for different reasons. I'd meant to write them down, but Wayne Grudem in his systematic theology had a sort of 6-point thing, so I may have accidentally stolen some of this from him. Some of it's just... things in my own mind, but often just to seek more of God's presence in their lives, to seek him in prayer, to dedicate time that we would spend eating or doing something like that, and say, let's use that praying. And just to be clear, so I've known people that have done this in different ways. They've said the time they normally take watching the telly, I'm just going to put that aside tonight and spend time in prayer. But often it's related to meals and food and different things like that. Perhaps just to recognize and be reminded of my own dependence on him and how all I have comes from him. And I notice that more when I'm hungry, and it makes me seek him more and thank him and pray to him. It might be in an attempt to put some sin to death in your life. And you're saying, Lord, I just want to, this just helps me with that. It helps as I resist this food, as I resist what I'm doing here. Lord, teach me to resist sinful temptations. Other times it's just when we feel our walk with the Lord is out of track and I feel far from him, Lord, I want to dedicate this time to draw me close to you again. Take my mind off the here and now and focus on what is to come. Sometimes it's just, as I see in Scripture, just seeking God's will in some way. Lord, there's some really good choices I can make here, and I have no idea which way to go. I'd like to dedicate a bit more time to just help me understand, help me find the way forward. And obviously these things have to be done with care. I think probably more than ever now we're aware of people with various eating disorders or things that go on, and the last thing I would want to do would be encourage someone to be triggered into bad habits or damaging habits or anything like that. God doesn't need you to do that in order to find him. Do you know what I mean? I think that there's a lot of religions out there that would say, if you don't do this, then you're not right with God. God knows you, and he knows your circumstances, and he knows what's going on in your life, and you don't need that to be near to him. You can pray to him, you can read his word, you can be close to him without that. And you see, this is part of the beauty, I think, of Christian fasting. Not that I'm the best at it. I'll be very open and honest about that. It seems to be in my playbook, it's like the Cinderella of the spiritual disciplines. And I don't say that with pride. I say that with it seems to come up. And anyway, but I just would caution as well. I think caution is important. But the beauty of Christian fasting is it's not to earn God's favor. Isn't that wonderful? That's not what it's about. God loves us. He's pleased with us in Christ. We don't need to do this to earn brownie points with him. It's just about seeking him and longing for more of him. It's a discipline that is informed by grace and the gospel. And that's That's a beautiful thing. It just says, I want more of you, Jesus. I want to know more of you and your will for me to be like you. A book I found very helpful a few years back was by John Piper, whose ministries really helped me in a lot of ways, but it's called A Hunger for God, Desiring God Through Prayer and Fasting, but it was just a kind of more detailed one. If you want to borrow that, you're more than welcome to do so. But Jesus flips their understanding of why they do this now, of fasting, and gets at the bigger picture a little bit. They need to change their thinking in regards to fasting. But now that the bridegroom is here, they need to rethink all together. And he uses two further images to make his point. Really interesting pictures here, isn't there? To make the point that you just cannot add Jesus onto your own traditions or your way of doing things. You cannot sew an old bit of garment onto a new one. And this is what the passage says here, isn't it? No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. That just made me think of being a boy at school, and school trousers and playing football was never a good combination. You come home with a hole in the knees, or just from being somewhere where you could just slide on your knees, because for primary school boys, it's basically an Olympic sport. So you just slide on, there's a hole, let's just slide on our knees, and then coming home with holes everywhere, and your mum angrily sewing it back on or patching it back on. It lasts for a bit, it works for a little while, but no, it's not the same thing. And what would happen here, particularly what Jesus is saying, is that all this would cause to do is that it would make a worse tear. You can't just patch Jesus onto your way of doing things, onto your life, onto your man-made traditions. And equally, no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Again, if it wasn't for the Bible, this is a word that would not be in my vocabulary. Wineskin? I mean, I've heard of wine bottles or wine glasses or cartons, even but wine skin. But of course, that's what they used in these days for making the wine. But the point he's making is that if he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the old used wineskins cannot cope with the new wine. And so the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. So it's useless for absolutely nothing. Simply pouring in Jesus into your own stuff and your own way of doing things, adding a little bit of Jesus into your wineskin is not the same as coming and following him and taking every part of our minds and hearts and saying, Lord, I want to conform this and shape this to you. Jesus, and you can't just add me into your traditions and make me do what you want me to do and try and make me fit that. Jesus fulfills the old and has strong words for those who would enforce man-made traditions on his people. He says, woe to you, Pharisees, for you lay burden after burden after burden upon people. They weren't even in the Old Testament, never mind now that I've come. Or I think of Paul writing to the Galatians when they're trying to add, they're saying it's a Jesus plus thing. You need Jesus, but you still need the circumcision as well. And Paul, being kind of direct and to the point, says, I wish those who say this would just emasculate themselves. You know, Paul was he was direct, wasn't he, our Paul? He was so angry that they had turned away to another false gospel, angry at those who were teaching this. He says you need to think differently about this whole way of thinking. You need to exchange your way of thinking for mine. We must be aware of this ourselves. When we come to Christ, I know Paul's talking to people who are had a faith or were religious in some way, but even when we come to Christ for the first time, we can be tempted to hold on to our things. Maybe it's a particular sin or something that we prioritize in our lives. You know, do we prize simply security and comfort over coming to follow Jesus when Jesus says, come and take up your cross and follow me? We can't just add Jesus on like a patch of garment. Or do we have our own man-made traditions that we try and enforce on other Christians? Some things that might actually be good for us as a conscience issue, but not necessarily for others. I remember speaking to a guy who I think he's gone into ministry now, but he was a big gym guy. He used to love going to the gym, and he was in great shape, like really good. But he had to give it up because he said, it's become my idol. It's become my God. But he would never have tried to enforce that on someone else, because that's not for them. This is his conscience, this is his thing. And so he had to put it down. It might even be in our church gatherings as well. We have to be wary of things that would unnecessarily put another law on someone, or that isn't really biblical or isn't really according to Christ. There's been so many kind of fights about which instrument to use in church and which not to use, and you think how much of these arguments are really based around Christ and around his word and what he would lead us in. How much of it, what we do, is man-made tradition, and how much is of him? Are we really prioritizing Christ? I'll actually be looking next week at these few passages from chapter 3 also, the first 12 verses. They actually go together quite nicely, because Jesus talks about this, and in another sermon you might have just done the three together, but I kind of wanted to focus in a bit more. But there's this sense of the Sabbath and how the Pharisees had distorted that and added burdens, taken something which was supposed to be a blessing, and through their laws had made it a burden on God's people. And so we must be wary of this. We must aim to shape our lives to the ways of Jesus, to the word of God. And we will get that wrong sometimes. I've got it wrong before. So praise the Lord for his grace and mercy towards us when we try to be legalists, or when we try to be the opposite of that. But Jesus calls us all to in some way say, out with the old and in with the new, kind of. It's just to sort of change our way, to change our thinking. My sinful way of thinking, or my way of doing things, and say, Jesus, I want to do it your way. I want more of you. I want to be the one who is longing for you and longing for the return of the bridegroom. He has been taken from us for a time. Although he's with us, he's always present with us, but we don't see him in all his fullness right now. But he will return again. And when he does find us, will he find us faithful when he does come back? Will he find us seeking him and his ways? Have you believed and trusted in the bridegroom? Can you say, I am part of his bride this morning? This one who went away. The one who went away so that I could be with him for eternity. He had to go away for my salvation. And because of that, I'll be with him at the wedding feast, at the banquet, the marriage supper of the Lamb, instead of outside in the darkness, facing judgment. Let's exchange our ways for his. Seek him, obey him, enjoy him, until we are in his presence and we see him face to face. Amen.